Please don't forget to assign host controls, Jim.
As folks are joining, if you intend to participate in public comment tonight, if you could indicate your name and the town in which you reside in the chat, that would be helpful. Thank you. Jim, did you receive any note from Teresa? I know Diane is unavailable this evening. I didn't hear anything from Teresa.
We were just on with her.
Okay.
A couple minutes ago.
Taking a well-needed break in between. Again, I'll just remind those joining us, if you wish to participate in public comment tonight, please enter your name in the messages for the chat and the location.
I think you have the chat locked because I can't put my name in there.
Okay, we can check that.
Thank you.
I think that should be good to go now. You could try right now. Deb, were you keeping track of who we're waiting on?
Yep, I'm just giving it right till 6:30 now, Jim, just so we can start timely, but we have everybody I believe that we should get.
Okay, great.
Diane is traveling for business this week. Okay, looks like it is 6:30. We will go ahead and call the meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. when we will open with a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance
Allegiance to the flag of the
of the
United
United
States
States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one
One
nation,
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty.
and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Celeste, any agenda changes? I know there was one piece item added, but I think that's in the current agenda.
That is correct. And there is a presentation tonight for discussion for the mitigation plan that
Yep.
Jim added today.
Okay, yes. I noted that as well when I was preparing. Thank you.
Mhm.
So I noticed that Ms. Sanchez has indicated she would like to address the public in privilege of the floor. Is there's anyone else who would wish to address? If you can put your name in the chat, I believe that's working now. And then we will go ahead and open the floor up. Just a reminder, the policy for privilege of the floor is listed in the agenda. And I will go ahead, Avis, if you would like to address the board. I think you're
I apologize. Hold on. I had to put my phone on a charger. So I find it interesting that the board does a pledge of allegiance before they start a meeting, but I was just wondering why all classes don't do it every day.
I think I will ask Jim if when you get to your superintendent's report, if you can address that. I know that was brought to your attention.
Yep, no problem.
Okay. Is there anybody else? Okay, we will move on. Thank you, Avis. We will begin with administrative reports. On the agenda, we have elementary school RTI response to intervention.
All set? Can you hear me? Am I good? Okay.
You're all set.
All right. Thank you. I wanted to touch base on the RTI at the elementary building. But I'm going to start back from last year where we were challenged with staffing and space. Given the needs of the building and how we were allowed to have groupings and things like that, it was just, we had no idea how we were going to approach this. One of the things that came up is that we were also very lucky. I did not have to assign RTI teachers to a classroom. We were able to staff the rooms with other support staff. So now that I have a fully functional RTI team, how are we going to address the needs of the building? One of the things we did is we took a strong, hard look at our data. We looked at what grades have been most impacted by the shutdown and what had been most impacted by the learning. And it came down to a couple of grades. We looked at first grade and we looked at second grade. Those seemed to be the hardest hit by the type of learning we had to do for the past couple of years. So then they drilled down even more with their data, saying, okay, what specifically are we looking at? And does one grade level look more hard hit than the other? And it did come down to last year, it was second grade that we saw the hardest hit. They made a plan of like what I like to call, and if I'm using this basketball term wrong, I apologize, but like a full court press. I think I'm right when I say that. Hopefully I am. Am I right? You're nodding, Jim. Thank you. So they made plans on how they were pushing in and really addressing what I call curriculum gaps. We don't use the term learning loss. I don't believe there's learning loss. I believe we've got gaps. and for instruction that got interrupted, either from quarantine, from being home, but we had curriculum gaps. So we were very specific at looking at what didn't they learn from the previous year? What do they need to know? And what can we let go? So we almost looked at the standards side by side. All right, we can let this go. No, we can teach this concurrently. Or, you know, we have to stop and we can't go any further until we've taught that. So that was the embrace of second grade. So, but now what do we do with the other classrooms that might need support, but we just don't have the staff or space or the ability to group to happen? So we talked about rethinking the classroom tier 1. Now we had smaller rooms last year. There were fewer kids in a room. So we went back to talking about universal instruction. What does that look like? How do we meet that? It means that 80% or more of the students are achieving. That's good universal instruction. So each teacher still continued to have what was called an Rti block, which we have at every grade level. It's protected time of 30 minutes a day. So the teachers could do their own tier 1 interventions with support and feedback from myself and the RTI teachers on what to do next and looking at their data, what to revisit and what to look at. Now we did that all year. I'm not saying there weren't pitfalls there because some teams were much stronger than others and meeting that challenge. However, one of the teams that we had extreme success with, again, was second grade. Now, second
Andrea,
grade wasn't stepped.
Andrea, I'm sorry. You'll tell me when to advance, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I will. Yes, I will. I'm sorry. I'm going to do my whole spiel. And then yep. I'm laying the groundwork. I'm laying the groundwork. So again, second grade was one of those grades that had 2 teachers and an aide, which meant that teachers rotated throughout the day as well as the other as the aide, and they all rotated. So the classrooms each had a teacher instructing them throughout the day. They weren't with an aide. However, it's a very strong classroom aide. So when we looked at second grade and how we pushed that RTI time in and how we used that resource of looking and really drilling down at what skills were still in the curriculum gap, what was necessary, what still needed to be taught. And when we looked also at the way we were teaching the comprehension and the level of text we were using with students. Also, we looked at second grade. We didn't want to bring it down too low. So we used what we called really rigorous text levels with second grade to see and taught them with rigorous text. So I wanted to be clear about that because that was a strategy Mrs. Walsh had talked about, had read about, and was employing with her team. So when we look at the success of second grade, okay, Jim, I'm ready. When we look at the success of second grade, you can see this is the NWA report. Now you see where the diamond shows where they expect the kids to have achieved, and the blue is exactly where they achieved. I'd like you to take a look at second grade. They surpassed. Now, but please remember, they also came in way behind the 8 ball and through no fault of anyone. I want that to be clear. This was not anything other than due to the circumstances these children had. So with this model, you will see this is math. And Jim, if you would please, the next one. And this was ELA. Now, you can see that not all grades were successful. However, again, tough year. But with the model that we had and used with second grade, we achieved a lot. Now, would I tell you that all children were at the benchmark of second grade when they left? No, but what I'm telling you, this is the growth they experienced in a year in a grade level that had 2 teachers and 1 aide that rotated through. First grade had the same setup, 2 teachers, 1 aide. Third grade had 3 teachers and an aide. If you might remember, we had everybody was stationed in the classroom. Fourth grade had 2 teachers and an aide. Fifth grade had all teachers, and sixth grade the same thing, 2 teachers and an aide. So as much as we have tried, but I just want you to see some of the hard work and how really drilling down and really putting our resources where we needed them, which was second grade, because it's imperative that these children get that level of reading set by the time they enter third grade. That's just this benchmark that we like to have. In fact, research will say you should have this benchmark by third grade. So second grade did a phenomenal job. But there's one more thing I'd like to show you about them and what they accomplished last year is the next grid or chart. If you look at all those dots, you aim for that upper right quadrant. Look at that is high achievement, high growth. That is 2/3 of second grade had made that much gain. And we still have in the upper left, although their achievement may not have been as high as we wanted, but the growth was high, very high. And then very few high achievement, low growth. And then some students still, we had low achievement, low growth. That's a success story from last year. So what we did is at the end of last year, we had what's called a standards handoff, where every grade level evaluated their priority standards that they have identified. And we wanted to know, of all the priority standards, please identify where 80% or more have mastery. And for example, kindergarten came to first grade and said, here's the standards where 80% of our students have mastery. Here's the ones that they don't have. So by handing that off to first grade, they can plan what is necessary to teach. What can we teach concurrently? And what do we really have to stop and go no further till they've mastered this standard, and so on. And at first did it with second did it with third, and so on. That way, everybody knew where their starting point was this year and what had to be filled. Where were the curriculum gaps? Not learning loss, but the curriculum gaps. So they were still looking at them, excuse me, this year. One of the issues that we had last year, again, with all of this, I wish we could have replicated this model for second grade everywhere. However, but we did put our efforts into first and second. We weren't very successful with first grade. There were many issues that had come up with first grade. We had a long-term sub with Mrs. Ferris having been out on maternity. So trying to get that groove of planning and collaboration. We really needed collaboration between the RTI team and the grade levels. It was hard getting off the ground some of the collaboration and get that mojo going for first grade. Not as successful. There was also some issues of understanding exactly how and what was expected of the classroom teacher during their RTI time. Some of that was not very successful in addressing some of the learning issues children may have had. So we go forward to this year. We do the standards handoff. But I'm sorry, I got to back up. Sorry. Last year, before we came back to school, our math program did a 180 on us. They said, hey, we're revamping our program, but no worries, it's not going to be very different. Well, that was probably right up there. That was just a really misleading. It was way different than what the teachers knew than the program they were familiar in teaching. It was vastly different. So we stumbled coming out of the gate, trying to use the program, trying to understand the program, trying to use it to meet the needs of our students. We really struggled with that all year. Hence last year, we asked the board to recognize that we wanted to use the new program Reveal, which better met our needs. And so far this year, it's been working beautifully. It's got a lot of benchmark assessments. It's been working well. So we had problems with our math program last year, but this year, much better. So as we started this year with our standards handoff, knowing where we got to start, knowing what needs to be filled, what we can let go, I'm hoping to show that some of our data this year will show some high growth as well, as some of our RTI staff has yet again found that second grade is yet again a grade that is coming in as our neediest. But we are able now now that we can collaborate more, now that we can group differently than we had to last year, that we are able to service more students and yet still support second grade and getting those children as far as we can before they enter third grade, where the shift goes from learning how to read to reading to learn. And that shift happens in third grade. That's why there's that big push before they get in there. But our RTI team has drilled down a lot and has done a lot of reading up on some of the things that have been happening. And we find that some of the more foundational skills we're really focusing on and filling those needs. We're doing more frequent progress monitoring, and they're having much more success on filling these curriculum gaps with the students. I feel very confident this year that we are still going in the right direction, and that we still have a ways to go. But at this point in time, I'm quite confident and quite pleased with the RTI team and some of our grade level teams that they're really moving in the right direction.
Thank you for that, Andre. I appreciate it. Do we have early indicator data of the confidence? Is there data that's
I do. I did not present it tonight, but I'm more than happy to put it together. I started to, we just did a mid-year check-in where we have like 3 data points we can look at. And I was talking with Jim about it earlier and looking at where we have some concerns about, okay, we're seeing some gaps here, curriculum gaps. And the beauty of our new math program is, as there is Fontes and Pinnell benchmarks, this math program offers fall, winter, end of the year benchmarks to help us check in on how the units of instruction have been going. So we took a look at that. We've got the NWAs. We do have some data on that I've been working on trying to put together. Jim's been helping me because I'm all over the place trying to put all this info and data together. I'm like data paralyzed right now. However, but we do know what we're looking at. Yes, we have some good data points. We're seeing what we thought we would see. We know that there are gaps. And again, if I may just say, I don't see learning loss. I see that we have curriculum gaps where instruction has had to halt and stop and start again. And it's very hard to maintain that learning when you have that happening. So we're approaching it from a point of a curriculum that we can fill, as opposed to a loss that someone needs to regain. So we take that kind of spin on it.
Right. I think that the idea of learning loss kind of indicates that it's the student's fault.
Yes.
That they missed something.
Right.
And it's not that. It's just that the curriculum needs to be realigned. And that's going to happen for the next several years in every single course, because there are gaps in curriculum in every course, K through 12, and in college too. And I imagine that even college graduates probably are missing some of the skills. We know that in our own student teachers, or our own new teachers, some of whom did not do typical student teaching. So all that stuff needs to just be rethought. I just wanted to point out a couple things. One of the real strengths of our district, and not just of the elementary school, but of the district as a whole, is the RTI program. The RTI program at the elementary school is fantastic. These are folks who really do know how to analyze data and apply it to classroom settings, and also are constantly coming up with action steps to address problems, and then monitoring them and reacting to them throughout the course of the year. I think it's impressive to watch them work. I did have a question about second grade in terms of like, so I guess I'm a little biased to believe that maybe our second grade teachers are just super fantastic teachers, and that's why they're outpacing their peers on these norm based assessments. What is it that they're doing that is having success? Is it just a developmental thing that kids tend to make a lot of growth in second grade, or is there some kind of special sauce that you're noticing that we can try to replicate elsewhere?
one of the things I think it is, Jim, just having watched them for the past 2 years and as we meet monthly, is they really, really, really know their standards. All right, so by knowing your standards, and when they got the handoff in first grade and they went, oh, okay, that they were not afraid to say, okay, I don't have this goalpost. And that's something, and I speak to Jim this all the time. I don't give a goalpost for the teachers to be at in June. I say, let's fill these gaps and let's see where we end up. I think to say that, to tell teachers that you need to cover all that curriculum by the end of the year, I can't do that. I think it's more important to the student that they get the instruction that they need. We fill those gaps so that when they get to Algebra 2, they're not lacking those building blocks that we didn't cover back in elementary school. So that's more important, but they know their standards so well that when we showed them what standards, what few standards had 80% accuracy, that they really meet every day as a grade level and review their data, review their instruction, and how they're going to deliver and what they're going to do. That's one of their strengths, is knowing their standards and looking at what the kids needed, how long they were going to stay there, what they were going to do, what they were going to let go. They had that conversation. They discussed it. They reviewed it all the time. Did every grade level do it? Probably not, but they did that. They said, okay, we can let this go because it's not needed for us to build. But this one, guys, I know it's from last year, but we got to reteach it. They don't have it. So we got to make sure they've learned it. So that's their strength. That is one of their strengths. And they're not afraid. Well, that's not true. Melissa Walsh, I always say, Melissa, please, you don't have to be here by June. I know, but I got clearly, she didn't listen to me. She just went ahead. But that's their strength. As a team, they do that. They're willing to. And I told everybody, for 3 years, we're going to be doing this for at least 3 years. There's no goalpost. Just be able to identify the standards that have 80% mastery among your students, and we'll hand them off. And that next grade level will pick up and fill and help and move forward with that.
Yeah, I love the idea of the handoff, right? And having a visual into where kids are coming in and being able to target and address that without an assumption, right? Because you can look at an individual's child's scores and that and get it. But when you can look at overall and address, because unfortunately we don't teach one-to-one all the time, but then having RTI to come behind that and partner with them, that's really, it sounds like
that was probably
beyond the
one of the best things we've done.
Yeah, I would love to see it replicate, right? And see those kind of outcomes replicate. So
it's just really knowing your standards. That's how you really got to know. You got to live, eat, and breathe them, and really. This is a hard team to let go of anything because they want to do everything. They want to do it, and it's just like, you know what? If it doesn't impact the building blocks for the future years, let it go. Let it go. Let it go. And that was, and they embraced it, and they said, all right, we can let this go, but we can't let this go because they're going to need this skill to build on this one and third, to build on this one and fourth. So they really had that discussion all the time, all day, every day.
That's great. Other board members have questions? Teresa, I see your hand pop up.
Yes, I not really a question, just a comment. I want to say thank you for the presentation, especially for the growth and achievement chart. For someone who's like a visual learner, seeing it in that format was really helpful. We get a lot of reports for the board, and it's like 7 out of 10 students and 8 out of 23, and like that conceptually is difficult for me. So seeing it this way was really, really helpful. So thank you.
Anyone else? Well, thank you very much. That was very comprehensive, and look forward to having you come back towards the end of the year as things go on, even with the mid marks, and see where we're tracking.
I would like to show like what it looks, what we look like at the end of the year, and talk a little bit about the standards handoff as well.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Andrea, can you know what would be really cool too is if we were actually to take some video of some of those interactions between teachers when they're doing that handoff, because I think that it's impressive to watch these folks work. So before you mute yourself permanently, Andrea, can you just address quickly, there was some kerfuffle about the Pledge of Allegiance. Can you
Yes.
fix that for me and just
Yes,
let
and
people know?
yeah, I reached out with sixth grade in our building. We don't do the overhead announcements anymore because they're already in instruction, which used to be a cue to say the pledge. So although K through 5, they say it, it's just part of their morning routine. I reached out to all the teachers. Yeah, we say it. There might be 1 or 2 times like, it gets a snack. I'm like, all right, guys, we need to say the pledge. But for sixth grade, they jump right into instruction. It fell off their plate. I talked with them today. We're back on track. So it was truly a misunderstanding that, because they do start, like, I think it's like 8 o'clock, I think, and that's science and math. And then it goes into another section of science and math, like a middle school movement. And so that when the teachers responded to me and I asked, I said, okay, checking that people understand they're doing that every morning. Those were the responses I got. So that is addressed, and we'll be moving on with that. I'll be following up.
Thank you, Andrea.
Yes.
Isabel, I see your hand is up, but unfortunately, we've already gone through privilege of the floor. So if you want to send Jim an email or the board an email about the question that jogged in your mind, that would be great, and we can get right back to you. Okay, we will move on to superintendent status report.
So I know that there's a discussion element down in later on in the agenda. I'm not sure if you want to discuss this now or if you want to wait until then, but I think that's probably up to you. I just wanted to give everybody an update about COVID and COVID protocols. There's a lot of folks that I know are interested in where our numbers are right now, and also what we're going to do should the mask mandate especially be removed by the governor. And so I want to talk about that because I know that it's on everybody's mind. So the first thing that I want to point out is that in terms of positive cases, we're still on a really great downward trajectory. We only had 4 positive cases, 2 in each school last week. And so in a very short period of time, like less than a month ago, we had 49 active cases in our district. And so we've gone from 49 to 4 in a month. And so we're back down to the kind of numbers that we were seeing at the beginning of the year. Maybe still a little bit elevated because we did have several weeks where we didn't have any active cases earlier this year. Also, quarantines, you can see that quarantines have gone down to virtually 0. There were 0 last week, 0 the week before. And that's because people are participating in Test to Stay. And we certainly have lots and lots of tests. I'm going to send something out tomorrow also to just encourage people again, if they want to have a test to take before coming back after February break. Now would be a good time to request one from nurses. We could stick them in backpacks and send them home with kids. But it's a good idea to take those. I really hope that people use those. We have so many tests now that we could make another wing out of over-the-counter COVID tests. So it's a much better place where we are right now with testing than we were earlier on in the year. So in terms of, so what happens if the mask mandate is lifted in schools? So this has been on everybody's mind. I know that there was that appeal that caused a lot of unnecessary drama in lots of different parts of the state. I think a lot of it has to do with, like, if folks aren't following lots of court cases, they may be confused about what the Supreme Court of the state of New York, how it differs from the Supreme Court of the United States. It's actually very, very different. The Supreme Court is a lower level court in the state of New York. And it's really the appellate court that is our highest court in the state. And then the other bit that was really confusing was about how quickly things happen and whether things can be overturned in a night and just sort of change without say so. And so I've talked about that ad nauseum. I feel like the regulations that we follow and who we follow them from. But there seems to be a likelihood now that the governor may address this mask mandate in schools shortly after the February break. And we know that because in a press conference that she gave overturning the mask mandate for businesses, she said that she would be looking at certain data points in schools and make a determination after that break. What we've seen over time is that after these breaks, we tend to have a big spike and then things come back down again. So I think that she's probably looking to see if we have that big spike again. But there's all sorts of other data points to look at too. For instance, like transmission rates, even though transmission rates have come down significantly, we also know that a lot of people now are taking over-the-counter tests instead of PCR tests and not reporting the over-the-counter tests to the same extent. And so to a certain extent, those transmission rates don't really paint an accurate picture of where we might be with transmission rates. So there's lots of things like that that just have changed over time. So I'm not sure what other data points the governor is going to be looking at. She did name several. Transmission rates was one. Another one was hospitalization. Lots of things. Vaccination rates might be another one. She's looking at some data points, and then she's going to make a recommendation after the break concludes. So, but what I know a lot of people are thinking is like, so well, what happens then? So say she decides to remove that mandate, how would schools react to that? And so instead of being caught like flat-footed, it's important to have a plan in place for what we might do if that's the case. And so I've made a proposal that I'd like the board to discuss a little bit later on about what my suggestion would be for how to proceed. So there's two things that I really thought about in putting together this this next phase of how we're going to deal with COVID in our schools. This model seems kind of silly, but it actually is the model for dealing with respiratory pandemics. And so it's called the Swiss cheese model. And so basically what the Swiss cheese model says is that no one mitigation strategy is perfect. So you have lots of mitigation strategies that have holes in them. And by stacking them together, you hope to plug all the holes, like when you're stacking Swiss cheese on top of each other. So masking is one of these layers of Swiss cheese, but there's lots of layers that are in place. None of them are perfect on their own. Like washing your hands is another layer of Swiss cheese. Making sure doing some quarantining and contact tracing is another layer of Swiss cheese. Keeping the windows open. All these things together, you put them together and they make a pretty good blocker against respiratory diseases. So just by removing one of these layers doesn't mean that all these other layers go away. We still have lots of things in place that are going to help keep kids safe, even if masking is one of those things that drops off. So that's one of the things that I was thinking, and one of the things I was reminded by our county health experts. I met with recently all the superintendents in the area. I met with all of the counties, the 4 closest counties, health directors to talk about these things. And that's one thing that they really reminded us all is that, yes, it's true that in the news, you hear a lot of stories about how masks aren't 100% effective against this latest strain of COVID. That's true. And that's been true for all the other strains as well. But we don't expect it to be 100% effective. We expect it to be sort of effective. And then by layering everything together, it makes for an effective strategy. So that's one thing I've been thinking of. Another thing that I've been thinking of is whether or not we need a backstop. Okay, so one of my biggest fears with ending the mask mandate, and I think probably a lot of people have similar apprehension is, well, what happens if things really, really spike up? Is that something that we would have a plan in place to deal with? Or would we just kind of like let it go so that, you know, it kind of just, everybody ends up getting sick, and then we work through it that way? It's not my feeling that we should let things go totally off on their own. It's my feeling that we need some sort of backstop to prevent a really widespread infection rate in our buildings. So it is my belief that at a certain point, masks are an effective tool to use in our arsenal to try to keep infection rates down. So, but I do know that I know that, like, psychologically, everyone is at a point now where they're just about done wearing masks. I absolutely sympathize with everyone who would like to put their masks away and never put them back on again. I think, though, that to say that we're never going to put them back on again, regardless of what the situation is, discounts the fact that sometimes masks are an effective tool to use. So that's another thing that I've been thinking of, is what do we do to put up a backstop in case we really need it? So I want to first talk about some of the steps, some of those layers of Swiss cheese that are going to be there regardless of where we are for transmission level, at least for this year, right? So we know that social distancing does matter. And so we're going to continue to try to social distance whenever we practically can, and try to avoid large congregations of people sitting on top of each other. But we know also that sometimes social distancing has an impact on instruction. And so we want to make sure that we're prioritizing the instructional opportunities that we're giving to kids. But also we're keeping in mind that sometimes when we can, social distancing is what we should really be shooting for, especially right now. One of those times that's really important to socially distance is during mealtime. So during mealtime, when people's masks are off and they're putting things in their mouth, they're putting their hands near their mouth, it's important to be aware that that's a time where transmission could be a pretty risky endeavor. And so we're still going to continue to use the system for eating lunch that we've been using all year long, where we've spread kids out into multiple rooms to eat and not put all of them in the same confined space right now. We know that cleaning and disinfection is really important, and making sure that we're doing that often is really important. And so we're going to continue to do that. We know that ventilation is also really important, and especially increased fresh air circulation. Whether that's through mechanical means, through our air handler systems, or through open windows and doors, we're going to continue to do things like that. And then also we have some areas where we have portable air filtration systems, and probably we will get some additional portable air filtration systems for classrooms with things like HEPA filters in them to reduce the spread of not just COVID, but other kinds of airborne respiratory viruses like colds and flus and stuff, to keep people healthy and in school. We are going to continue to post up things about hand washing and continue to emphasize hand washing and use of hand sanitizer in school. We're going to continue to encourage vaccines, and as needed, we'll continue to organize vaccine pods, especially if something happens, like say the governor decides that she wants to tie the mask mandate ending to vaccination rates, and we need to do additional vaccine pods to try to increase our vaccination rates, which are quite low in the elementary school. So we would certainly do that and work with the county to do that. The pods that we've had have been successful and have run very well, and so that's not very challenging to do. We're still going to require people to stay home when sick. That almost should go without saying at this point, that if you're sick, you should stay home. But that's for students and staff. We understand that sometimes that's a hardship, mainly on yourself, because I know a lot of people don't like to miss time. I'm one of them, but sometimes we just have to stay home so that we don't get other people sick. And so that's a really important consideration from here on out, is staying home when you're sick, not trying to chance it by coming to school when you think you could get other people sick, whether it's COVID or anything else. We are going to use the same protocol for returning to school after COVID. So right now, that means that if you've had COVID, after 5 days, you can return to school. Those folks will still have to wear masks for another 5 days upon return. And they can return as long as after 5 days their symptoms have improved and they're fever-free. COVID-19 surveillance is something that's changed a lot, but it's something that we're going to be doing to a certain extent for the foreseeable future, but just in a different way. So we're not doing nearly as much contact tracing as we were. And if we were to take masks off, we'd be doing probably even less contact tracing, because really at that point, everybody becomes a close contact if nobody's wearing masks in classrooms or anything like that. So we probably wouldn't be doing those close contact notifications to people and making them test to stay, but we'd still encourage people to be taking tests regularly and to stay home if they're symptomatic. The one thing that we would continue to do is we would continue to test athletes and people involved in the musical. People are in these high risk situations. Continuing to pool test is something that we'll continue to do. And then we also have an obligation to continue testing our employees who are unvaccinated per New York State requirement. And that those folks aren't required to test if they've had COVID within the last 3 months. And the same is true for athletes and folks in the musical. If they've had COVID, they don't have to do those pool testing. And then also the other thing that we're going to continue to do is continue to have high quality masks available for everybody. Right now, if you wanted a KN95 mask, you could go to the health office and get one. I know that, so say the mask mandate were to drop, there are some people in our school systems that would be very apprehensive to be in school in that situation. I would remind them that there's been a lot of research recently on one-way masking, protecting the individual wearing the mask. That's really positive. And so you really can protect yourself by wearing a mask if you choose to do that. And also, well-fitting masks are still things that can be very effective, especially well-fitting masks that have good filtration systems in them, like KN95s or N95 masks. So those are available for people who want them. So this is where we start to get into some things that would be determined based on the level of transmission in school buildings. So at the beginning of the year, one of the things that I presented was a tiered mitigation system that was tied to county-wide transmission rates. So what we found throughout the course of the year is that we were never going to get out of certain levels, right? So we were pretty much in high the entire year. I think now we're not, but pretty much the entire year we were going to be high because Schenectady County was high, even when our transmission rates in our school were low. And so instead of tying this to the transmission rates in the county, what this represents is transmission in a school building, right? And so it could be that the elementary school has a different rate, has a different transmission level than high school. Usually they're going to be about the same because kids do kind of come into contact with each other on the bus and in various other places like their houses. And so really those two levels are pretty much the same. regardless of what week it is. The elementary is pretty much the same as the high school. Elementary tends to be a little bit higher, but the vaccination rate in the elementary is also a little bit lower. So what I was looking at, so without metrics, it really leaves it up to us to kind of determine what a metric might be. And so I was thinking about like, well, what would we tie our metrics to? And how would we make sure that we have some sort of backstop in place so that things don't go out of control? And so what I try to do is set a high threshold for each building. And it's actually a threshold that we have not met. We almost met it at one point in January, like right after break. But so basically there's 3 different levels: a low, a substantial, and a high. In the low, which is 0 to 15 cases in a school building, again, we've rarely been at 15 cases all year long. There's only been a couple of times when we've been at 15. So almost, I think all but like 2 weeks this school year, we would have been in this low range. At that point, masks would be optional, and we wouldn't have restrictions on things like indoor athletics, large group events, transportation, PE, and performing arts. So if I were to guess, I would say that this is likely where we would end up. The substantial range is 16 to 24 cases in a building. That's when we would start making recommendations to people to do certain things like wear a mask. We would be reducing our capacity in certain places where we can reduce capacity to at least decrease the risk of transmission a little bit. And we would be, the bell covers for the wind instruments would come back on in band for wind instruments, but still these would be optional things, but they would turn into recommendations. Once we get to 25 cases in a school building, it is near panic time. So 25 cases is very, very high. Let me go back to my earlier slide. So 25 cases in a building is very high. The highest we've ever been is 49 cases. So there would have been 1 week this year when we were in the high range through this chart. I use that as my high watermark because that week was panic inducing, and also the first week where it was unclear whether or not we would be able to continue having normal school with that level of transmission. And so that's why I chose that as the threshold where I think we need to put a backstop. So at that point too, I think it's really smart to start reducing capacity even further and doing some of the things that we've been doing this year, like encouraging people to find rides to school instead of riding the school bus so that we could reduce capacity on school buses, indoor athletics, reducing it back down to 50%, large group events going down to 50%, and starting to maximize physical distancing during performance arts, especially where kids are singing or playing instruments right next to each other. So even those mitigation strategies are pretty limited, but it would require people to put on a mask at that point. What I'm really hoping is that people understand that I do understand where people's feelings are with relation to masking. However, my tolerance for risk when it involves kids' health is really, really low, like 0. And so I would prefer not to have the risk. I understand that we're at a point where we're ready to do that. And I think that that's a great thing. And I'm glad that we're at this point. But I also know, having lived through this for 2.5 years, that things could change rapidly. And when they change rapidly, I think we need the ability to slow some stuff down temporarily until things get under control. So I'm really hoping that I'm really hoping people see that as an emergency valve and not something that we're looking to do. No one's looking to make masks a permanent part of our lives, but you can't discount an effective tool in the case that you need it. So that would be my suggestion. So what I would ask for the board to do is I'm really eager for your thoughts about this. And I'm also, what I could do too is, like, if you give me your thoughts now, I could definitely go back through and make edits or considerations. I'm not asking the board to vote on this tonight. I think it would be premature to vote on this before the governor makes some kind of announcement. And I think it's also important for everybody who's watching out there to know that this is a draft proposal, and its intent is only to answer this question: what happens if the mask mandate is lifted? So right now, the mask mandate is still very much on, and we're still following it. So this is just to have a plan in place for if it goes away suddenly, and we need to make sure that we address folks. The other thing I would ask everybody who maybe is an opponent to masking in schools to remember is that in this community, there are multiple perspectives on all of these issues. There is not a team mask and a team non-mask. That is a very simplistic kind of view of what's going on here. There are people who are legitimately apprehensive about masks going away. And so it's important to also take their voices into consideration. So those are the things that I was thinking about, and I will leave it up to you, Deb, to decide whether you want to discuss it now or discuss it in the place on the agenda.
I think either way, and we have, I know, guests on who are probably interested in what discussion we may have around this and who may not be as interested in the remainder of the agenda items. So I think it is perfectly fine to open this up to any comments or questions from board members only. Again, if you have specific questions about any of this as an attendee to the meeting, please submit that question in writing. We can manage through that way. Any board members like to make a comment?
I'd like to make one if
Yeah.
no one else wants to go first. I really do like the idea that we have a plan. A plan is what I've wanted all along from anybody, because a binary choice is not valid. Like you said, there is no team mask, team not mask. I don't want the kids masks, but I do, because this is a place where children are mandated to be. I feel there needs to be a conservative health policy in effect. And like you said, the Swiss cheese plan is the best way moving forward. I do have a question about for like events where we're going to adjust capacity. Are we going to look at trying to slow spread by making it so that it's only local people, or how would that work in those situations?
I don't think that that's worked up till now to reduce capacity by geographic area. I mean, throughout this year too, we've had like visiting fans and family members from out of town attending different events. I don't know how we would be able to do that.
Okay. I had one other question, but I don't remember what it is right now. So thank you very much for answering my question. Thank you.
Other comments or questions from board members? Melissa, I see your hand.
Yes, I have. Well, I may have others, but just off the bat, I guess one of the questions I have is, or one of the scenarios I'm thinking about in my mind is, what do we do? We've had this happen certainly with other illnesses where it just hits a particular classroom or a particular grade level really hard, and so we could have only 8 cases, but what if all of those cases are in 3rd grade? Doesn't it make sense to sort of address the way that we mitigate if we have clusters? And I don't know if that's something we can really anticipate or put into the policy, but I feel like it's just something that's on my mind, because we do have that happen regularly, that particular classrooms or grade levels are hit hard.
That's a great question. I don't entirely know the answer to that. One of the things that popped into my head though was, we do have the availability right now. What we're doing if a grade level really starts exhibiting some positive cases, to distribute to rapid tests for everybody else who's in that group. So at least that they can test, monitor for symptoms. We can at least tell folks to monitor for symptoms and take tests to make sure that they're not coming to school with COVID. So beyond that, I'm not entirely sure what we could do. Yeah, but that is something to think about.
That just sort of skews the percentages, right? If we have 50% of one grade level, that's still only maybe 2% of the school building.
Yes, it absolutely does. Yeah. I think that if we had 50% of a grade, we'd be in big trouble.
You might just go virtual for that grade level until that passes.
Yeah. And then, oh gosh, I had one more question. Are the percentages, Jim, that you have in there, the 0 to 15 cases, is that staff and students, just students? Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So that includes staff and students at that building. It's roughly 400 if you add staff into each building.
Okay.
And there's some things that aren't quite perfect. Like we put the transportation staff with elementary school, and we put the maintenance staff and district office staff at the high school. Okay. But it was to get around percentage.
Perfect. Thanks.
Any other board members? Oh, Shane.
I have a question about where COVID testing fits into the return to school. So on the, that slide, it talks about, returning to school after COVID-19. Now, if you take a PCR test, or are we going to keep one is if you take a PCR test and pass, or the second one is if you get a test kit from the school, are we still going to allow the, 2 tests 36 hours apart with an affirmation from the parent saying, the child seems fine, would that allow for a quicker return to school? And would that also be a legitimate reason for the child returning to school to avoid having to wear a mask for the next 5 days?
Are you talking about returning to school after they've had COVID or after they've had symptoms?
I was thinking after having COVID, but I guess it could be symptoms too. So that'd be another question.
So I think the answer to if you have symptoms, yes, taking a rapid COVID test, 2 tests 36 hours apart, is a pretty effective way to return pretty quickly. A PCR test, you can take a PCR test on day 1, 2. We could give those to you in our nurses' offices, and you'll get that one back in about 36 hours as well. So pretty much if you have these symptoms, you're going to be out for a couple of days. Mm-hmm. If you have COVID, there's a really good chance that you could continue to test positive for up to 30 days after you've had COVID, even after your symptoms have improved. I know that some people, it might have been you, Shane, that asked about whether or not we need a resolution of the symptoms or whether or not we just need improved symptoms. And really what the guidance has said recently is that if the symptoms appear to be improving, you're probably not going to be a big risk for transmitting anymore. And so that 5 days is enough. Now, whether or not they have to wear masks 5 days upon return, I guess I'll ask the county what they think about that. I would think that they were going to say yes. So if I ask, they're going to say, yes, there's no way to, they're still going to be transmitting this disease for at least 5 days after they've had it. So I don't know how you get around a person who's had COVID coming back without a mask. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think that the odds of them not having to wear a mask after coming back to school are very great. I think they're probably going to have to do that.
Okay. Yeah, it would be good to know what the health department's take on that is.
Yep, I'll ask.
Any other questions, Shane? Are you good?
I think I'm good. Thank
All
you.
right, Teresa?
Thanks. I appreciate the chart. Another visual that is good. Also, the idea of like a backstop, I think, is good. And I can definitely say that like high transmission rate of being in a school and teaching when it was that bad for those couple of weeks and having to cover classes every single block and moment that I had, it was, physically exhausting and, having half your class absent. And so, the idea of having something to make it safer if we do get to that point again, I think is a good idea. I think there are intricacies that are all the questions that everyone has brought up. There's going to be special situations and special circumstances that we're going to have to work through. But in general, I think that the chart is a fair and just way to handle that. And then with the cases, also looking at them, we're relying on people to be honest in their reporting too. And I think that's part of the chart that's probably the most difficult. We've been, relying on people to be honest. Same thing like in my own classroom, I rely on all my students to have their masks covering their noses and their mouths at all times. But when I'm at the front of the room teaching the subjunctive tense and there's 3 of them with their mask down, I don't stop teaching the other 26 students. So, I think, we're all doing the best we can. And I think this chart probably seems kind of the best we can with what we have. Thank you.
I think another thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is that there's no way, I don't think that there's any way to be at this stage that we're in without the anxiousness of, okay, but what's going to happen? So no matter when we do this, there's always going to be this stage where we're not quite sure how the population is going to react when we start pulling some of these layers away. I do think it's time to try some stuff. But yeah, I do understand what people are feeling when they just don't know. I know that still when I'm out and if I find myself in a crowd, I'm like, I don't feel entirely comfortable yet. So.
Yeah. Tony, did you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but I just even from what Jim just said, I think that everybody has to understand that this is all new to us, that haven't been many pandemics in my life before. So just to have these kind of steps to get to a solution where it's benefit everybody. Let's just try to see how this works.
Yep.
That's all.
Yep. Thank you, Tony. Melissa? Did you remember your other question?
I knew I'd have another question. Yeah. It's not so much a question, but also just I think it's so important for all of us to keep in mind that this is how viruses work as well. So there will be strains that are worse and strains that are less intense and less severe. And so we're going to do the best we can with the information that we have today. But as that information changes, we may need to change, because if we end up with another strain of this that's really, really dangerous, we can't rely on something that we put together when the strain was relatively mild. So again, just to make everyone aware that we're doing the best we can with the information we have now, and we will change as we move along.
I couldn't agree more. Like the biggest barrier that we could have is if we're inflexible to dealing with new situations. So one of the things that's helped us be successful is that we're small enough that we can kind of pivot and do different things and fix problems. So we have to continue remembering that we need to do that as things change. It's when people are like, nope, masks are done. I'm never putting these things back on again. I sympathize with you, but I'm also like, I don't know. I mean, there's certain situations where we may have to. So, give everybody the flexibility. Don't take any tools out of the toolkit.
Yeah, Jim, I'll just add my closing thoughts. So on a personal note, it has been wonderful over the last week or so to hear people in the community or being somewhere say, oh, I forgot what your smile looked like, right? Or those things. So we're all humans. Everybody sitting here, everybody part of this group feels real things and I don't know a single person out there who's like, I'm going to love this mask forever. Although I will say in 10 and 0 degree weather, I appreciate it. My nose isn't as frozen. But we're working to get back to a place of normalcy, but we're doing that through the lens of also being smart and not taking huge risks. I like so many want our kids to be able to remove them and get back to, but I applaud this approach because it gives us the opportunity to move back. If something terrible happens, if God forbid we hear tomorrow that there's the next strain of this thing, is to Melissa's point, back to what we started with, we need the ability to shift. We need to continue to talk about the current state of things as a board and hear the current state of things from Jim as things go forward. There's not a one person, I believe, in this group who feels like we're just going to do this because we think we should have masks because it's fun. Like I've never heard it from anybody. It's been about protection, and there are definitely different perspectives on how to protect our children and how to protect and what's right and what's wrong. I applaud the community. I want to applaud the community today for peace and sharing your opinion and doing so in such a way that's not disruptive. Everybody absolutely has that right to do so. And I think throughout this process, if we can agree to disagree sometimes, but agree that we should all be heard, I think that's the way to go. We will do our best. I will do my best. And I know the board will work with the district to continue to do the best for the children. So I don't have any additional comments, Jim. I think the questions on the plan have been discussed. I just do want to remind, as you said, that this is a plan, a draft. When this change comes down, that there's nothing taking effect or changing what happens in school tomorrow. Okay, if there are no other comments or questions from the board on this particular topic, Jim, did you have anything else for us in your update? Thank you for that. We will move on to the budget workshop.
All right, good evening, everyone. So we're going to do our second budget work session for the 22-23 school year budget. Sorry, I'm muted instead of advance the slide. Okay. So tonight we will talk about the rollover budget status. We have made some slight changes to the budget so far since the last session a couple weeks ago. The tax cap and the tax levy. So the tax cap is due on March 1st. So this will be the last board meeting or board work session before the tax cap has to be submitted. The operations budget, maintenance budget, and the transportation budget. I'll let Jim start off with the next slide.
So just some considerations while we're making the budget that I wanted to keep you aware of. One is that we know that there are some changes in the economy that we have to worry about. There's some inflationary things that are happening that are definitely something that we're aware of. We also know that we have a little bit of federal money, not a little bit, but a significant amount of federal money. But we do have the goal of not using that federal money in a way that gives us big holes down the road and presents a cliff that we just can't get over. We know that our state aid was pretty decent this year at 3%, but we also know that now that our school district has been told, along with all the other smaller school districts that have been hold harmless districts, that since we're fully funded now, we're not likely to experience great increases in state aid, and that things are more likely to stay relatively flat. We know what our contracts are with our staff. We know that we have one contract, especially that we're working on now with our support staff, to make sure that we can counteract some market conditions that we have in terms of starting rates of pay and hardship to find different kinds of employees, specifically bus drivers and maintenance workers and folks like that. We also know that we have pretty healthy reserves, and we know what our BOCES budget is now, and we really want to make sure that we keep all of our academic programs in place. There are also other things to consider, like insurance rate increases and retirement system rate increases, that are things that we have to be aware of. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to be aware of in this budget, even though this budget doesn't present like a lot of new instructional programs or other things like that. There are a lot of things to consider as we come out of this pandemic.
So the budget has been adjusted a little bit. It's actually gone down a little bit since the last session. We're looking at right now at a draft. We're at a $734,000 increase from budget to budget. From budget to budget, the first draft in this would be near a 4% increase. I believe after working through some of the other budget lines, there's going to be some more cuts and more reductions to some of the budget lines. You can see those two lines, those instructional costs and the medical and benefits. Those are those things that we still don't have finished yet in the budget. So instructional costs is a large portion of the budget that I still need to work through. And then medical and benefits, those are the things that we still have to settle. So our health insurance benefit, which is one of the largest portions of what that increase is going to be, still has to be settled. So we actually will be finding that out in the next few upcoming weeks. And then hopefully that line will hopefully go down. But right now we're looking at it like a double-digit increase just on that health insurance line, because of what the current economy is showing us. So just at a glance, the proposed budget right now would be $18,619,000. That's all going to change us through our budget work sessions. Total increase of $734,000. This also is using a revenue tax levy increase of $150,945. Represents only a 1.8% increase from budget to budget on the tax levy increase. Jim, do you want to talk about this one?
Boy, do I. So you're going to see districts go out at zero this year. And so just to kind of emphasize the fact that going out at zero, even though it seems attractive to not raise anyone's taxes at all, this is why a 0% tax levy increase is not a good idea. And so we know that you're going to see some suburban districts that receive some additional funds this year. So as they were trying to make those, so even though we held relatively steady at 3%, some of these schools that weren't being funded up to their full foundation aid levels received really big state aid increases. And so some of these suburban districts that you'll see around us who are going out at zero, it's reflective of the fact that they are experiencing a great deal of increase in state aid. The other thing that they're experiencing is a great deal of the federal money. You're also going to see some cities, school districts like Schenectady, who received an incredible amount in federal aid and state aid. Our federal funds are pretty modest, and our gains in state aid are pretty modest. because we're a safe, harmless district, so that we're one of the smaller districts. There's a lot of safe, harmless districts across New York State. A lot of districts did, I think it's like, I want to say it's like 46%, but don't quote me, of school districts that are safe, harmless districts. I'll also say that election years, going into an election year, are typically easier on state aid funding. So we do, things are going to change when it's not an election year in terms of what that foundation aid looks like. And also raising taxes incrementally over time is more fiscally responsible than going 0 one year and then up to the cap the next year to compensate for it. So what we're trying to do is making sure that we have a decent amount of revenue so that we don't end up with situations where we have to cut programs in order to cover gaps. So again, I'm probably going to say this every single week, just because it's really important, because you're going to see folks go out at 0% increases. And it may be that you see a district, actually, I don't know why they would, but you may see a district go out at a negative. And so I would tell you, when you see that, your initial instinct should be, that's not a good idea over time. And so that's why we're not recommending that. So 1.8, it's $150,000. But that $150,000 goes a long way to helping us make sure that we can maintain programs over time, and we don't have to shock anybody's wallet with big increases down the road.
All right, so next we'll talk about the revenue stream for our district. So just a look at the overall tax cap. So just to keep in mind that the law restricts that cap at 2% or lower based on inflation. So this is only like one of those components that's in the actual tax cap. The rate of inflation for 22 is actually 4.7%. So if the rate of inflation had been like 1.6, we would have been limited to that 1.6. So looking at the economy right now, though, there's no way that we could possibly, take into consideration such a low number. The rate of inflation this year, though, 4.7, brings our inflation factor up to a maximum of 2%. So this 2% is in the tax cap calculation, amongst all of the other things like exclusions that are also calculated throughout our tax cap. So that includes like the debt service, state aid. So all of those things have to go into the tax cap calculation to create this number that we've got right now, which is our tax cap is like 2.62. So the tax cap that came out years ago considers taxpayers, right? It doesn't consider the fact that we could have years like this where inflation is just through the roof. So we have to keep that in mind. So this kind of emphasizes some of the things that Jim had said in the previous slide, is that the inflation this year has really gone up. We don't know what's going to happen next year, and in order to stay on a good path and to keep the district in good financial condition, we do have to take that incremental step instead of asking folks later on for a huge increase on taxes. And we see that many of the budgetary items like supplies and contractual things are definitely increasing at more than at rates higher than 2%. And we can see just on a couple of the lines that we had shown on one of the previous slides, there are sections of the budget that are definitely going to increase at a higher rate than 2%. So also to keep in mind, though, that the actual tax cap and the tax levy increase does not actually show what the individual's bill is. So if you're in the village, or if you're in the town of Schoharie, which we do actually have properties in the town of Schoharie, or you're in the town of Dwaynesburg, your actual individual tax bill is not going to be exactly that amount that we're saying we're going to increase. So there's a lot of other factors that go into your tax cap calculation or into your tax levy increase, including home values and star calculations and your local your local property taxes. Also, the tax cap does not limit how much we can actually levy the district. The voters do, but we must maintain a 60% approval if we want to go higher than that tax cap calculation. So just to keep in mind, like that, trying to exceed that at a later date when we need $300,000, when that's much higher than our tax cap, we could have some difficulty convincing folks that, instead of just doing the incremental increases, to go back. Also, just to keep in mind, like if the budget does get voted down and we go into a contingent budget, there's no increase to the tax levy. So then we have to start looking at cuts to programs and things that are some of the extra things that we provide for students, so that we can maintain that 0% increase. Because we know that things, contractual things and supply things are still going to go up. And those are the things that unfortunately are going to have to take the seat. They take the driver's seat, and then the other things that are optional, we have to cut. So the tax levy history, just if you can see over the past several years, we've done very well with our district to maintain a lower tax levy than the actual tax cap. So the past few years, we've gone out with a tax levy that is even less than 2% and less than our 2% tax cap. So the tax cap in 2021 was 5.11. In 21-22, it was, so this existing year, it was 4.45. In both of those years, we went out a 1.9 and a 1.95. This year, for the 22-23 school year budget, we've got a tax cap calculation of 2.62% and a proposed tax levy of 1.8%. It represents $150,945. That will bring our total tax levy to $8,536,811. This is the same slide that I showed at the last time. Just a general look at what it could potentially be. Again, this is just kind of an example to show ballpark where a tax levy increase of 1.8 could be on a household. So if you have a home that is assessed at $300,000, your total taxes would be approximately increased by just under $100 for the year. So and then even like, so a house that's assessed at $100,000, you're only going to see about a $32 for the year for an increase. So the 1.8 for taking this incremental step doesn't really represent a huge change. State aid run. This is based on the governor's run from January. So right now our foundation aid is at a 3% increase overall from last year, as we were told when the budget came out last year that we would see that 3%. That 3% is lower than the districts that aren't safe harmless districts. We got that general 3%, as did most of the other districts that are safe harmless districts. Then we also have BOCES and special services increases. We use BOCES a lot, and we try to use them a lot more for our purchasing because of the fact that we have so much of a great return on using BOCES services. So anywhere from using BOCES for coaching, using BOCES for applications that we use for computer technology. There's also we do some IP purchases as well. So like our copy machines. So all of those things actually it gives us back revenue for the following year. So it really it pays for itself really. And then we're seeing some transportation aid. So as the increases come up on buses, of course, we have that debt service. So when we take out debt for buses, just as much as we have a 5-year plan for a purchase on a bus, we also get that five-year transportation aid to buy that bus from the state. So that's where some of that may be coming from. We don't know. We also don't know in the governor's proposal what some of the other things might be. if there's any application to any of the items that were in the governor's budget, some of the aids. We don't know those things, and we will find that out later on when the legislative budget comes out. So overall, look at our revenue. We have a property taxes of 8.5 million. Our state aid is at 8.8 million. Both of them representing, again, it's real close. So the real property taxes and state aid, they stay neck and neck just about every year. So property taxes right now represents about 45.85% of our overall budget revenue. And then state aid represents about 47% of our revenue. One of the other large portions of our budget, this would be coming in third, of course, is to take on savings that we've saved from prior year budget, and represents about 5% of our budget. So right now we're putting back in $938,000 in fund balance to appropriate to the budget. And the past few years, we've also put in this reserve appropriation so that if we get to that point where we need that extra $100,000, we would pull that reserve out. That's our safety net, really, to balance the budget if we end up in a budget on a really tough budget year. Next, we'll talk about the expenditure portion. So operations budget, this is a pretty large portion of the budget, as you can see. It is represents about $910,000. Some of the increases in the operations budget come from just this overall budget to budget salary increases. And then also we really do need to refinish the gymnasium floor for the basketball, and so that they can play sports in the gym. It really needs to be resurfaced. So that's one of the things that's going to go into the operations budget for next year. There's really no decreases in the operations budget, but some of the lines I was able to find some spots where we could just leave them at the same level that we had them last year. So we didn't really need to increase them as drastic. So just to be transparent about what we're doing with equipment money. So last year we had proposed the purchase of another vehicle for plowing to maintain our facilities. This year we're proposing to purchase a mower that is a lot safer for hills. We have a lot of hills here, so it would be in our best interest to replace one of our old tractors that does need to be cycled out. We have an old, like a John Deere mower that probably was like a lawn and garden, like a large lawn and garden tractor at one point in time. And we're replacing it with a much more safer machine for hills, so they can do the hills over by the baseball field, and they can do the hills at the elementary school as well. And then also we have found with our facilities that there's a lot of overhead work that needs to be done a little bit more often than what we're able to do. So right now we don't really have a lift. We have a portable little lift, but it's not really the safest thing in the world. It's kind of like rinky-dink little thing. And we kind of pride ourselves on safety. So that's going to be one of those other things that we really could use. And this would be like something that they could maintain the ceilings and HVAC and lights in the auditorium and the gymnasium. And it can also be portable. It's also portable. We can throw it on the trailer. They can take it over to the other building, so they can use it in both facilities. We won't need two of them. It's just one item.
Just to let everybody know, we do currently rent one of those things every year, and so basically we save up all of our overhead work for like the same, 2-week period, and try to cram everything in. And so this would also allow us to do some of the repair work as it's needed, instead of, waiting until we have that scissor lift rental.
So next is the maintenance budget. Last year I had kind of presented the operations and maintenance as a together item, and in some cases they kind of are, but maintenance is where we take out some of the repair work for the building, repair parts, and then our custodial services. So overall, the budget for maintenance our increases again are just going to be based on salaries. There's a really small decrease on the contractual line for maintenance, but overall, so we're not seeing a huge increase on the maintenance budget. And some of the lines also I was able to keep maintain a 0% increase from budget to budget. So keeping the same budget for next year for the same as this year. And then the last part of the budget that we'll talk about tonight is the transportation budget. So there are many things with the transportation budget. Last year we cut the diesel line out because we don't have any more diesel buses. So we only have gasoline and propane buses. So now we only have to maintain 2 of those fuel lines. The transportation oil, there is fuel oil. So we do heat our building with fuel, but that's not for the buses. Transportation budget. So slight increase overall from budget to budget, 1,138,540. The increases that we're seeing there is going to be for driver salaries, gasoline, and contractual items. We do expect that contractual items for transportation will probably go up as well for next year. And then we'll continue to decrease the propane line. So with the propane line decreasing, we're able to balance those 2 lines between the propane and the gasoline because we are reducing our fleet of propane buses as well right now. Those propane buses we've been pulling out of the fleet because they are much more expensive to maintain when they need repairs. So we found as much as the propane buses were a great thing and they're a clean energy, they've also been very expensive to us, and they haven't really compared now to the newer gasoline motors that are performing very well. So on the budget vote, the proposition, there will be a second proposition, as we have always proposed, to purchase new school buses. We're on around a 10-year cycle. So to replace the 10-year-old buses would be 2 65 passengers and a 30 passenger bus. Right now we're looking at not to exceed $350,000. So again, all 3 of these buses will be fueled by gasoline. And then here's our planning schedule. Our next time that we discuss the budget, next time we have a work session, will be to discuss debt service and employee benefits. And then you can see all the other plans ahead. And now I will turn it over to Jim and lead the work session.
So we talked about tax cap, tax levy, and we also talked about 3 sections of the budget tonight. We talked about operations, maintenance, and transportation, and also the proposition that we have for bus sales. From what I understand, we'll also have 2 propositions on the budget vote because BOCES is trying to sell some buildings. And so that's something that has to be approved by all the component communities. So just so you know, there's going to be something on our budget that we won't talk about until later because it doesn't have anything to do with our district. It's just the fact that we belong to the BOCES. But does anybody have any questions or concerns or comments about any of these sections that you want to talk about?
I just have one question of clarification, Jim, and forgive me for not knowing this already, but this save harmless means that we're not going to have our funding impacted by enrollment. Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly? Because the enrollment was down during the pandemic. Is that right?
No.
Okay, I'm glad I asked then.
That's okay. So the save harmless had to do with schools that are smaller in size that actually were funded fully, and actually in some cases like ours, probably funded more than the foundation aid formula said that schools should have gotten. So there was a percentage of schools like our size that were getting our foundation all along and then some. There were also schools that never were funded at the level that the formula said they should have been funded at with foundation aid. Earlier, was it end of last year that lawsuit was settled at the beginning of this year. Time is not a thing that exists in my head anymore, but there was a lawsuit where those city school districts and those suburban school districts that weren't being funded were actually suing the state for not meeting that obligation of fully funding them. And so this governor settled that lawsuit and said that they would be fully funding those school districts. So now I think that there was like a 2-year phase-in period or 3-year phase-in period for the foundation aid. Do you remember, Jeff?
I think it was 3.
And so we're in year 2 of a 3-year phase-in for a lot of those school districts. And so next year, all those school districts will be fully funded as well. But the worry now is for these safe, harmless school districts is like, oh, okay. So if everybody's going to be fully funded now, we've been getting more than we should have gotten. Does that mean that you're not going to increase us because we're already fully funded? And so there's a real danger to keeping us. If they say, oh, sorry, you already have the aid that you're getting, we're not going to increase you anymore, then we have to still come up with enough money to deal with all of our annual contractual increases and supply increases. So that's the worry that I have now is like, what happens now that everybody's fully funded? Are you going to keep us flat? Because if you keep us flat, it's really means that we have to cut things. So not sure how they're going to deal with that, but eventually they're going to have to address the fact that there's going to have to be a replacement for foundation aid or some other calculation that's made. Anything else you want to add to that, Jeff?
No, you pretty much got it all.
Thank you. And thank you for clarifying. I remembered all of that I just didn't put those 2 items as one and the same.
Yeah. We could go into more detail, but it would just confuse everybody. So
That's okay. I'm good now. Thank you.
You should see the slideshows before we present them, because we do have some details in there that are just too much for normals.
Jim doesn't like my details.
No, I think this is the right level of detail for us to understand and from which we can ask questions if we need to go deeper. So
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members on the budget? Okay, we'll stay tuned for the next segment, Jeff, in early March. Thank you very much to both of
Okay.
you for that information.
All right, so I will submit the tax cap calculation at that 1.8 then
Yes.
before the March 1st deadline. So
Yes.
Tax levy calculation and then the tax cap at was it 2.6 whatever?
Yeah, let's go back to
2.62.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So
okay. Thank you very much. We will move on to presentation and approval of prior Board of Education meeting minutes. Approved minutes of February 1st, 2022 board meeting. Recommendation that the Board of Education accept the meeting minutes from the February 1st, 2022 meeting as submitted. Do I have a motion?
I'll motion.
Thank you, Francis. A second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Shane. Any comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, moving on to new business, Board of Education Standing Committee. Were there any committee meetings between the February 1st meeting and this evening? Nope, Melissa, you have your hand up.
Yes, the policy committee met earlier this evening, actually. Jim did some presenting on the ways we may be implementing our DEI policy, just sort of a work in progress right now. And we're going to be finalizing the memorial policy and how to memorialize folks in our district and the community building use policy. So we're sort of updating those and we hope to have those out in short order.
Great. And I think the memorial policy that kind of was jogged by a community member reaching out to us. So I think if we just make sure that we circle back, I know it's not on the agenda yet, but that we make full circle on that, because it was a good call out. Any other committees meet? Okay. We will move on to financial, accept claims auditors reports. Recommendation that the Board of Education accept the claims auditor's comments on general warrant A27 dated February 2nd, 2022 for $191,220.75 and general warrant A28 dated 2/7/22 in the amount of $134,760.69. Is there a motion?
A motion.
Thank you, Teresa. A second?
I'll second.
Nope.
Tony can have
We're giving it to Tony. Any comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. The next item under financial, approve emergency bus resolution. Okay. I think I missed the recommendation piece of this, so hold on one second, please. I still go old school and print out the agenda for myself to read from, and sometimes I miss a piece. Okay, this is an action. I'm not going to read, I'll read the beginning and then the rest will be as documented. Whereas on January 12th, 2022, a Duanesburg Central School District bus was in an accident which caused damage to the district-owned vehicle. And whereas Utica National, the school district's insurance carrier, has determined the bus to be a total loss. And whereas the insurance carrier has paid the district $114,191.11, the full value of the bus. And whereas the bus must be replaced immediately so the district may continue to provide transportation services to its students. And whereas educational law, section 170925 permits the district to purchase a replacement bus without voter approval, be it resolved as written. Do I have a motion?
I'll motion.
Thank you, Tony. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Melissa. Any comments or questions? I mean, Jim, everything going as planned with this?
I believe so. Jeff, did you want to comment on?
Yeah, so I will just comment that the expenditure of the up to $5,000 in the unappropriated fund balance will be for any safety features that were not approved of. There were a couple little small items that the insurance company, because we order our buses with different specs now, so LED lights can be seen a lot better in the Duanesburg fog. So that's one of those things that we started ordering our buses with, and it seems to be really beneficial for our buses for safety. So that's one of the things that the insurance company unfortunately did not include in their approval. There was another thing that just is recommended from Roush on the transmission on the setup for the axle. So that's another thing that's just in there. So unfortunately, there's just a little bit that we have to cover on our own, but that's just to bring our buses up to the same specs as what we would want to do with the rest of our buses, because we don't want to have one that's behind on the rest of our fleet now that we're going to have this new bus.
How does that affect the? Oh, sorry, Shane.
No, go ahead.
How is that going to affect the cycle? If they're on a 10-year replacement cycle and we're getting one midterm, I don't even know how old the bus is that we're replacing.
So, well, we have 10 years to figure it out. I mean, answer, right? But you know, there might be one that has a mechanical problem later on down the road. We could use there have been times when we'll use a bus, we'll overuse a bus a little bit more on a longer route instead of using it instead of rotating it onto a shorter run. So in order to get our usage out of it, maybe we might see that one of the buses might go through at a 9-year replacement instead. It'll still be paid for after 5. So it's a matter of, there have been years where we have one that, we have one bus that stays on the fleet for 11 years. Mm-hmm. It's all a matter of which bus has some mechanical problems. We could very well have one around that same time that has some transmission problems or, fuel pumps that go bad or whatever. So it's going to be something that we probably have to evaluate at that 8, 9, or 10-year mark.
Thank you.
I have a question. in item 4, it talks about a 5,000 fund balance in addition to the insurance of 114 and change. So I'm wondering if in item 3, if that's a typo, if it should be 119 instead of 114.
Oh, as the total, the
As the
5,000
total.
plus the 114.
That's the total for.
That's probably correct, right? That it probably should be 119 in number 3.
Yeah. Correct. Yes, it should be.
It's one transaction. Is that correct, Jeff?
It is one. Yes.
So we'll make that change to the minutes too, and
Yep. We
do you
can
get
vote.
that, Celeste? Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Oh, Tony?
How long will it take to get the new bus? Like,
We won't see it until, if we're lucky, September.
When do we normally see new buses?
Usually July. So right now, after talking to the vendor, now there's some other challenges that we're going to meet, and that's why we wanted to get this on the resolution as soon as possible to get you the board to approve it. So, is that one of the other vendors is not making a bus or whatever with a certain setup or whatever in diesel or in gasoline, and this is one of the few vendors that sells this bus of this type and has the features that we need. So there's actually less energy efficient buses. They're only pushing the diesel buses, and then there's other things like the governor doesn't want diesel buses to be on the road. So why would we buy a diesel bus? So that's one of the challenges that we're also going to meet with the market right now, is that this is one of the few that we have to compete with. So he called me up and he said, I know you guys were trying to get it done ASAP so that we can try. I mean, the goal is to get it by the end of August, but it's a possibility that we could not see it. We might not see it until September. Just like we did this year. We waited. One of our buses didn't show up until the second week of school.
Do you anticipate problems getting provided the voters approve the bus proposal? Do you anticipate problems getting those buses?
Well, right now we're on a anticipated promise right now with the vendor.
Okay.
So they've ordered the bus, and they had to order the bus. And right now, if the voters say no to the buses, then we lose them, and they'll just go and sell them to another school, because they know that they're going to sell them.
Cool.
So this one in particular, though, we had to make sure that we were settled. We had some kind of an agreement.
So we're in the queue on the other ones. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, moving on to other. Approved CSE minutes. Recommendation that the Board of Education accept the recommendation of the CSE meetings and their minutes from February 1st, 2nd, and 8th, 2022 meetings as submitted. Do I have a motion?
All motion.
Thanks, Shane. Anybody want a second?
A second.
Thanks, Teresa. Any comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, moving on to appointments. Approve appointments. Recommendation that the Board of Education approve the following appointments as recommended by the Superintendent and Assistant Superintendent of Management Services. All appointments are employees at will, and the appointment at this time does not guarantee employment for the entire school term or year. We have Ms. Lewandowski, and I'm not going to say Tina's last name correctly. Jim, if you would like to help me with that one. Anybody got it? Szynski. Thank you, Tony. I should know that you would be able to do that.
She's currently an employee of the district.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that, Jeff. Do I have a motion?
I'll
Motion.
I'll motion. Oh,
Well,
So Tony, Melissa, will you second?
sure.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The next item is approve amended appointment. Approve amended appointment effective February 1st, 2022 for the 2021-2022 school district school year incumbent as listed, followed by the recommendation appointment. Liaison for homeless children and youth, Holly Benjamin. Do I have a motion?
I'll motion.
Thank you, Francis. A second.
Second.
Thank you, Teresa. Any comments or questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. The next item is discussion. However, we covered that earlier during the superintendent's presentation. At this time, at 8:19 p.m., seeking a motion to move into executive session to discuss real estate transactions. Can I get a motion? Let me just mention to those joining us, there is no intention of the board to come back to the public meeting. No additional board agenda or board items will be conducted at that time. So we will be moving out and not coming back. Do I have a motion?
I'll motion.
Thank you, Shane. A second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Tony. All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, everyone, we will move to the link for executive session. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.